I'm Emma Castellanos, 32 years old. 8 months ago, at my parents' 60th wedding anniversary party in front of 150 guests at the Harborview Country Club in Newport, Rhode Island, my mother handed my sister Victoria the keys to a brand new $850,000 penthouse apartment in downtown Providence. Then she turned to me, pulled a rusty old key from her purse and said, "Emma gets the old Henderson property." Everyone laughed. What they didn't know was that the worthless 100-acre property they dumped on me was sitting on land worth $47 million. And I was about to find out in the most unexpected way possible. Before I continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to know how this story ends. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. I should start by telling you about my family. My parents, Richard and Margaret Castellanos, built a commercial real estate empire in Rhode Island starting in the 1980s. By the time I was born in 1992, they owned 17 shopping centers, 3 office buildings, and enough rental properties to fund the lifestyle they'd always dreamed of. My sister Victoria, 3 years older than me, was born with what my mother called the golden touch: perfect grades without studying, homecoming queen, full ride to Brown University, marketing executive at a Fortune 500 by 25. Me? I was the artistic one. That's what they called it when they were being nice. When they weren't being nice, I was impractical, unrealistic, or my personal favorite, living in a fantasy world. I graduated from Rhode Island School of Design with a degree in architectural preservation. I loved old buildings, their stories, their bones, the way you could feel history in the grain of the wood and the curve of the staircases. My parents thought it was a waste. "Who's going to pay you to look at old houses?" my father asked at my graduation dinner at Capitol Grill. He'd just ordered a $280 bottle of Caymus Cabernet. "Victoria's already pulling 6 figures. When are you going to get serious?" I worked 3 jobs to pay my bills after college. During the day I was an assistant at Preservation, Rhode Island, making $34,000 a year. Nights and weekends I waitressed at a seafood restaurant in Narragansett and did freelance CAD drafting for architectural firms. I lived in a studio apartment in Pawtucket that cost $950 a month, and had a radiator that only worked if you hit it with a shoe. Victoria, meanwhile, moved into a luxury 2-bedroom in the East Side that my parents bought her for $425,000. "It's an investment property," my mother explained when I asked why Victoria got help with housing, but I didn't. "She needs to be near her office. You can live anywhere." Family dinners were performances where I played the supporting role. Every Sunday at 6 p.m. sharp, we'd gather at my parents' house in Barrington, a 6-bedroom colonial with views of Narragansett Bay. My mother would cook, or rather oversee the housekeeper cooking, and we'd sit at the dining room table that cost more than my car. "Victoria just closed a deal with Textron," my father would announce, beaming. "Youngest account manager they've ever had." "That's wonderful," I'd say. "What about you, Emma?" my mother would ask, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer would disappoint her. "Still playing with old buildings?" "I'm working on getting the Wickford train station added to the National Register of Historic Places," I'd tell them. "That's nice, dear. Translation, that's worthless, dear." This went on for 10 years. 10 years of being the consolation prize daughter. 10 years of watching Victoria get the praise, the attention, the financial support, the validation. 10 years of my accomplishments being met with polite disinterest while Victoria's were celebrated with champagne. I'm not going to lie, it hurt. But I loved what I did. I was good at it. And I'd built a life I was proud of, even if my family couldn't see it. Then came the reading of Great Aunt Josephine's will. Josephine Henderson was my grandmother's sister. She'd never married, never had children, and had lived her entire 93 years in the same farmhouse in Little Compton that her parents had built in 1889. When she died in March of 2023, I was one of maybe 15 people at her funeral. I'd visited Aunt Jo 3 times in my life. Once when I was 7, once when I was 16, and once during college when I was doing a paper on Victorian-era farming communities. She'd shown me around the property, a rambling white farmhouse with peeling paint, a collapsed barn, overgrown fields, and a view of the ocean that made you understand why people wrote poetry. "It's not much," she'd said, her hand shaking as she poured me tea in her kitchen. "But it's been Henderson land for 134 years. That means something." I'd agreed. I'd taken photographs. I'd measured the foundation. I'd sketched the original floor plan. Then I'd gone back to my real life and barely thought about it again. At the will reading in attorney Bernard Whitmore's office on South Main Street in Providence, I sat between my parents. Victoria was in New York for a conference and called in via Zoom. Mr. Whitmore, a thin man in his 70s with reading glasses on a chain, cleared his throat. Josephine Henderson's estate is quite simple, he began. She owned the family property in Little Compton, 103 acres with the original farmhouse, barn structure and outbuildings. Current assessed value for tax purposes is $180,000. My mother snorted. That falling down shack? I'm surprised it's worth that much. She's left the property, Mr. Whitmore continued, to her great-niece, Emma Louise Castellanos. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? The Henderson property is yours, Miss Castellanos. There's a letter. He slid an envelope across the desk. My father leaned over. What about liquid assets, savings, investments? There are none. Miss Henderson lived quite modestly. Her only asset was the land. My mother patted my hand. Well, Emma, at least you got something, even if it's just that old wreck. Maybe you can practice your preservation hobby on it before you sell it to a developer. I opened the letter that night in my apartment. Aunt Jo's handwriting was spidery but clear. Emma, you're the only one who ever asked about the house's history. The only one who saw it as more than wood and nails. It's yours now. Don't let them tell you it's worthless. Trust your training. Look at everything. Josephine. I didn't understand what she meant, but I put the letter in my desk drawer and figured I'd drive out to Little Compton the following weekend to see what condition the property was actually in. I never got the chance. 3 weeks after Aunt Jo's funeral, my parents decided to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary with a party at Harborview Country Club. No expense spared. Raw bar with oysters flown in from Cape Cod, filet mignon and Chilean sea bass, a 12-piece band, flowers by an award-winning designer from Boston. Total cost, I later learned, was $67,000. I wore a navy dress from Nordstrom Rack that I'd bought on sale for $89. Victoria wore a custom Elie Saab gown that cost $4,200. My mother wore Valentino. My father wore a tuxedo he'd had tailored on Savile Row during a trip to London. At 8 p.m., after dinner and speeches from various family friends and business associates, my father clinked his glass. Margaret and I want to thank you all for being here tonight, he said, his arm around my mother's waist. 40 years, 2 beautiful daughters. A life beyond what we ever imagined when we started with one small strip mall in Cranston. Everyone applauded. Now we're not getting any younger, he continued, and people laughed. So Margaret and I have been thinking about the future, about legacy, about making sure our girls are taken care of. My stomach dropped. I don't know why. Some instinct. Victoria, my father said, gesturing for my sister to join them at the head table. She stood radiant in her designer gown and walked over. My mother produced a small velvet box from her purse. Sweetheart, your father and I bought a property 2 years ago, a penthouse apartment in the residences at the Providence River. 3 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, floor-to-ceiling windows. We've been waiting for the right moment to give it to you. Victoria opened the box. Inside were keys on a Tiffany keychain. It's yours, my mother said. The deed is in your name, all paid for, our gift to you for being such an extraordinary daughter. The room erupted in applause. Victoria was crying. My father was beaming. I felt like I was watching this happen from very far away. Emma, honey, come up here, my mother called. I walked to the front of the room on legs that didn't feel like mine. My mother smiled at me, the smile she used when she was about to say something she thought was generous but was actually condescending. Now, Emma, we know you just inherited Aunt Jo's old place, and we know that's going to need a lot of work, so we thought, what else does Emma need? She pulled another key from her purse. Not in a velvet box, just a key, old, rusty, with a paper tag attached. We're also giving you a property, my mother announced. The old Henderson farm property in Little Compton that Aunt Jo left you. Well, we're formally signing over our share of the family claim to it. It's all yours now, 100%. I stared at the key. We know it's not as fancy as Victoria's apartment, my father said, and people chuckled. But Emma's always been more about the sentimental stuff anyway. Old houses, history, all that. So this is perfect for her. My mother pressed the rusty key into my hand. You can fix it up, make it a project, or sell it to a developer and use the money to get yourself a nice condo somewhere. Either way, it's yours. The applause was polite, scattered. Some people looked uncomfortable. I heard someone near the back whisper, did they seriously just give her a condemned farm while her sister got an $850,000 apartment? I stood there holding the rusty key while Victoria showed off her Tiffany keychain to aunts and cousins. I stood there while my parents accepted congratulations for their generosity. I stood there and smiled and said thank you, and felt like the smallest person in the world. If you're still with me, drop a comment below. Let me know you're here, because what happened next changed everything, and I need you to understand. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was just looking for answers. I drove out to Little Compton the next morning, Saturday, early May, with the sun burning off the fog over the ocean. I took Route 138 through Tiverton and crossed into Little Compton just before 9 a.m. The Henderson property was at the end of a long dirt road marked only by a faded mailbox with Henderson barely visible in peeling paint. I turned down the drive, more like 2 tire tracks through tall grass, and after a quarter mile the farmhouse came into view. It was worse than I remembered. White paint completely gone, exposing gray weathered wood. Half the shutters missing. Front porch sagging so badly I was afraid to step on it. Windows either broken or so dirty you couldn't see through them. The barn behind the house had collapsed entirely on one side. I parked my 2014 Honda Civic and got out. The air smelled like salt and wild roses. You could hear the ocean, maybe a quarter mile away. The land rolled down toward the water in gentle slopes, divided by old stone walls that had probably been there since the property was first cleared. 103 acres. I walked around the outside of the house first. Foundation looked surprisingly solid, granite blocks that had settled but not cracked. The roof was shot, chimney needed repointing. Most of the windows would have to be replaced. Conservative estimate to make the house habitable, $300,000. Maybe more. I didn't have $300,000. I didn't have $30,000. I was about to leave when I noticed something. On the eastern edge of the property, barely visible through the overgrown brush, there were survey stakes, bright orange plastic flags on metal posts. New, I walked over. There were maybe 20 of them running in a line along what I guessed was the property boundary. Each one had a notation written in permanent marker. Coastal Dev 2024 LLC. My preservation training kicked in. Survey stakes meant someone was planning construction. They were on what appeared to be my land. That was a problem. I took photographs of every stake. Then I went back to my car and called the Little Compton Town Hall. Closed on weekends. I left a message asking about recent permit applications for the Henderson property address. Then I drove home and spent the rest of the weekend researching property records. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work. I drove to the Little Compton Town Hall on Meeting House Lane and asked to see all records related to the Henderson property. The clerk, a woman in her 60s named Diane, brought me 3 file boxes worth of documents. This is everything going back to 1889, she said. Original deed transfer from the Wilbur family to the Hendersons, tax records, various survey maps, building permits, it's all here. I started reading. The property had been in the Henderson family for 134 years, exactly like Aunt Jo had said. 103 acres purchased for $800 in 1889. Farmland mostly. The house built in 1891. Various improvements over the years. Electricity in 1927. Indoor plumbing in 1934. A new well in 1956. But here's where it got interesting. In 1972, there was a survey done by the Rhode Island Department of Transportation for a proposed coastal highway that was never built. That survey map showed the Henderson property boundaries clearly. 103 acres stretching from West Main Road to the coastal bluffs. In 2019 there was another survey, this one commissioned by something called Coastal Development 2024 LLC. The survey showed the same boundaries, but with an additional notation, subject property identified for potential coastal residential development. Preliminary environmental impact assessment pending. I felt my heart rate pick up. I asked Diane, has there been any recent activity on this property? Permit applications? Inquiries? She checked her computer. Actually, yes. 3 weeks ago, a law firm from Boston requested a property report for the Henderson parcel, Bennett Morrison LLP. Can you tell me what they wanted? It was a general inquiry, title search, zoning classification, environmental restrictions, that kind of thing. What's the current zoning? She checked. Mixed-use residential agricultural. Minimum lot size 1 acre, maximum height 35 feet. But it's also in the coastal protection zone, so any development would need additional environmental review. I thanked her and left with copies of everything. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot and called Bennett Morrison. A receptionist answered. Bennett Morrison, how may I direct your call? I'm calling about a property inquiry you made recently, the Henderson property in Little Compton. 1 moment, please. I was transferred 3 times before I reached someone named Garrett Morrison, Esquire. Miss Castellanos, he said when I explained who I was. Thank you for calling. I've been meaning to reach out to you. About the survey stakes on my property? Ah, you've been to the site, good. That's the same amount they offered me for the land. They're counting on you being grateful, David said. You got an $850,000 gift, just like your sister, except yours is money, which is easier to spend, and they get land worth 50 times that much. I drove home. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I sat in my apartment and stared at the wall and tried to understand how my parents could do this. Then I read Aunt Jo's letter again. Don't let them tell you it's worthless. Trust your training, look at everything. She'd known. Somehow she'd known what they were planning, and she'd made sure the land went to me to keep it out of their hands. What would you do in this situation? Comment 1 if you'd sell the land and take the money. Comment 2 if you'd confront your parents. Comment 3 if you'd do what I did. I didn't confront my parents. Not yet. Instead, I did what I'd been trained to do. I researched. David helped me file a request with the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council for all documents related to the proposed Little Compton development. Under state law, planning documents are public record once they're filed. What we received was a box of materials that revealed the full scope of my parents' plan. They'd been working on this for 3 years. Preliminary environmental studies, soil testing, traffic impact analysis, architectural renderings of the proposed homes, massive modern structures with walls of glass, infinity pools, private beach access. They'd already secured preliminary approval from the town planning board. They'd hired an architecture firm from New York that specialized in luxury coastal developments. They'd even pre-sold 4 of the homes to buyers who were waiting for the final permits. Total deposits received, $4.8 million. All of this hinged on them acquiring the Henderson property. I found something else in the documents. A letter from my father to the state CRMC, dated January 2024. As the prospective purchaser and developer of the subject property, I assure the council that the Henderson family is fully supportive of this project. We have a close personal relationship with the property owner, and acquisition is expected to proceed smoothly following her anticipated estate settlement. My father had written that letter 2 months before Aunt Jo died. He'd been so confident they'd inherit the land that he'd told state regulators it was basically a done deal, but Aunt Jo had left it to me instead. "What do you want to do?" David asked me. I thought about it for 3 days, then I called him back. "I want to keep the land," I said. Instead of 24 massive modern houses, we planned 12 smaller homes designed to blend with the historic character of the area. We preserved the original farmhouse and barn, which would be restored and used as a community center and farm-to-table restaurant. We designated 30 acres as permanent conservation land with hiking trails. We partnered with a local agricultural nonprofit to maintain working farm plots. The project was called Henderson's Landing. Luxury, yes, but sustainable. Historically appropriate. Community-focused. The homes would sell for $2.8 million to $4.5 million each. Lower than my parents' plan but still profitable. And the conservation land would qualify us for state and federal historic preservation tax credits worth $8 million. Patricia's financial models projected that I would personally net $12 million as the landowner. The investors would make $15 million. And Little Compton would get a development that enhanced rather than exploited the coastal landscape. We broke ground in September. I didn't tell my parents. They were still calling me every few weeks, checking in to see if I'd thought any more about selling that old farm. My mother mentioned that she'd heard property values in Little Compton were going up. My father casually suggested that if I wanted, he could help me find a buyer, save you the hassle. I said I was thinking about. I said I was busy with work. I said I'd let them know. Meanwhile, construction crews were clearing the access road. Environmental engineers were installing the septic systems. Architects were finalizing the house designs. The local paper ran a story about Henderson's Landing, calling it a model for responsible coastal development. My parents didn't read the Little Compton paper, but other people did. In November, my father called me. His voice was tight, angry. "Emma, we need to talk, now. What's wrong?" "You know exactly what's wrong. Harold Benson just called me. His firm was supposed to do the architecture for our Little Compton project, and now he's telling me you're developing the Henderson property with a different firm. What the hell is going on?" I'd been preparing for this conversation for months. I was ready. "I'm developing my property," I said calmly. "The property Aunt Jo left to me. That was our project, Emma. We've been planning this for years. You've been planning to develop land you didn't own. We were going to buy it from you. We made you a generous offer. Below market value, significantly below. That land is worthless except for development, and you don't have the money or expertise to develop it. You're going to run this into the ground and lose everything." "Actually, Dad, I have partners, investors. We've already secured $32 million in construction financing from Bank Newport. Pre-sales have generated $11.5 million in deposits. We break even at 7 homes sold. Everything after that is profit. Silence. You can't do this, my father said finally. That's our project. We filed for permits. We did the environmental studies. You're stealing our intellectual property. You filed for permits on land you didn't own. Any lawyer will tell you that gives me exactly zero legal obligation to honor your plans. I'm developing my property my way. We'll sue you. For what? I haven't broken any laws. I haven't breached any contracts. I own the land free and clear. You can't sue someone for developing their own property. You ungrateful little, he caught himself. After everything we've done for you, we gave you that property. No, Dad. Aunt Jo gave me that property. You gave me a rusty key at a party where you gave Victoria an $850,000 apartment while everyone watched you treat me like I didn't matter. That apartment was a gift, and this land was supposed to be my consolation prize while you made $47 million behind my back. I know about Coastal Development 2024 LLC. I know about MDC Holdings. I know the whole chain. David pulled the corporate records. Another silence. Longer this time. If you do this, my father said, his voice cold, you're out of this family. Do you understand me? You'll never be welcome in our home again. I understand, I said. Goodbye, Dad. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't crying. I felt clear, calm, free. Victoria called 2 hours later. Emma, what did you do? Mom is hysterical. Dad is talking about lawyers. I'm developing the Henderson property myself. That's all. That was their project. They've been planning this forever. How could you just steal it? Victoria, did you know the land was worth millions? What? No. I mean, I knew it had development potential, but did you know they were planning to buy it from me for $850,000 and develop it for a $47 million profit? Silence. That's not. Emma, they wouldn't do that. They did. I have the documents, the planning submissions, everything. They've been working on this since before Aunt Jo died. They expected to inherit the land, but she left it to me instead. So they were going to manipulate me into selling it to them for a fraction of what it's worth. You don't know that? Victoria, they gave you an $850,000 apartment. They offered me $850,000 for land they knew was worth over $40 million. They made sure everyone at that party saw that we got equal gifts. Do you really think that's a coincidence? She didn't answer. I'm happy you got your apartment, I said. Really, you deserve nice things. But I deserve not to be cheated out of the only significant asset I've ever been given, and I'm not going to apologize for that. Victoria hung up without saying goodbye. 3 weeks later, my mother called and invited me to Sunday dinner. Family business to discuss, she said. Important. I almost said no, but something in her voice made me curious. I agreed to come. I arrived at 6 p.m. on Sunday, December 3, 2023. The sun was already down. Their house in Barrington looked like something from a Christmas catalog. White lights on every tree, wreaths on every window, the kind of perfect that requires a professional decorator. I walked in. Victoria was already there, sitting at the dining room table. My parents were standing by the fireplace, and there were 2 other people I didn't recognize, a man and a woman in business suits. Emma, thank you for coming, my mother said. She sounded strange, too formal. These are our attorneys, Jennifer Walsh and Robert Brennan from Prescott Associates. I remained standing. Why are your attorneys here? My father gestured to the table. Sit down, we need to talk. I'm fine standing. Jennifer Walsh opened a folder. Ms. Castellanos, we represent Richard and Margaret Castellanos in a property dispute regarding the Henderson property in Little Compton. We're here to present a cease and desist notice regarding your development activities. She slid a document across the table. I didn't touch it. On what grounds, I asked. Your parents invested significant resources into planning the development of that property. Environmental studies, architectural designs, legal fees, permit applications. Over $470,000 in total expenses. By proceeding with your own development using knowledge and concepts derived from their work, you're engaging in tortious interference and misappropriation. I almost laughed. You're claiming I stole their ideas for developing my own land? We're claiming that your current project would not exist without the groundwork they laid. We're prepared to file suit for damages and to seek an injunction halting your construction. I looked at my parents. My mother's face was composed, neutral. My father looked angry. You spent all that money planning to develop land you didn't own, I said. That's not my problem. Emma, my mother said, and now her voice had the familiar edge. You're in over your head. You don't know anything about development. You're going to fail, and when you do, you'll lose everything. We're trying to help you. By suing me? By giving you a way out. We'll buy the property from you now, $1 million. You walk away with a profit. We complete the project, everyone wins. Except I'd be giving up land worth 40 times that. You don't have $40 million, Emma. You have a piece of paper that says you own land and a construction project you can't afford to finish. We're offering you real money. I took a breath, reached into my bag, pulled out a folder of my own. These are the pre-sale contracts for Henderson's Landing, I said, putting the folder on the table. 7 homes, deposits total $15.2 million, all buyers fully qualified and approved by our lenders. First closing scheduled for March 2025. I put down another document. This is our construction loan agreement with Bank Newport. $32 million, fully funded, first draw already released. The projects they'd been planning had stalled without the Henderson property as their flagship development. They'd had to lay off staff. There were rumors about financial problems. They lost everything because you were selfish, Victoria said. They lost one project because they tried to cheat me, I replied. If their entire business depended on stealing from their daughter, that's a business that deserved to fail. She hung up. That was the last time we spoke. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't hurt. I didn't want to lose my family. I wanted them to see me, to value me, to treat me like I mattered as much as Victoria. But I've learned something important. You can't make people value you. And you can't build a relationship with people who see you as a resource to exploit rather than a person to love. I have new family now. Patricia Keene and I have dinner once a month. David Chen is still my lawyer and one of my closest friends. The community at Henderson's Landing has a book club I actually enjoy going to. My employees feel like colleagues and friends, not just people I work with. Last week, I got a letter from Aunt Jo's estate attorney, the final closing of her estate. There was a note inside. Ms. Castellanos, in reviewing Josephine's personal effects, we found this letter she wrote but never sent. We thought you should have it. The letter was dated 2019. It was addressed to my parents. Richard and Margaret, I'm aware of your development plans for my property. I'm also aware that you've been telling people in town that you expect to inherit it when I die. Let me be clear, you will not. I'm leaving it to Emma, not because I dislike you but because I know you'll do what's profitable. Emma will do what's right. She sees the land the way I do, as something with history, with meaning, with value beyond money. I trust her to protect it. I don't trust you. This is my last gift to her. Don't try to take it away. Josephine. Aunt Jo had known all along. She'd protected me from beyond the grave. I framed that letter. It hangs in my office now, next to my RISD diploma and the Preservation Rhode Island Award. If you've made it this far, thank you. The story isn't easy to tell. If it touched you or resonated with your own experiences, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. And please, drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time it is there. I'd love to know who's listening. And remember this, your worth is not determined by how your family treats you. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. Real family is chosen, not assigned. The land Aunt Jo gave me was worth $47 million, but the real gift was bigger than that. She gave me permission to stop accepting less than I deserved. She gave me the proof that I was right to trust myself. She gave me freedom. That's worth more than any amount of money.